Welcome, everybody, to this very special double act. So this double act will begin with 60 minutes with Maroš Šefčovič. He is the Executive Vice President of the European Commission in charge of the Green Deal, and it will be followed by a panel discussion that will be moderated by Claire Lejeune. Where is Claire? Here we are. Where we will unpack the European Green Deal, but I think more broadly, how has the promise of a project to not only decarbonize our economies, but also the promise to do that in a fair and just manner, the promise to use this as the new lever of competitiveness and ultimately of geopolitical power. How has this fared? Where are the pluses, where are the minuses, and where are we seeing a course correction? Partly probably needed. I leave you to tell us, Maroš. But where should we also be very careful not to move too far into? So this is the conversation today. Let me do a bit of advertising because there is lots of people to thank. I want to thank first and foremost our partner, IDRI, Sébastien, for putting this together with the Sciences Po side, the School of International Affairs, the School of Public Affairs, the chair that we hold together, European Chair for Sustainable Development and Climate Transitions, also the Center for European Studies and Comparative Politics. It's a lot of very good preparation that has gone into this very important topic for now, for the elections that we will face in June, the European side of this room, but more broadly, for the future of our planet and the future of our societies and economies. So without further ado, let me hand over to Maroš Šefčovič. Maroš, let me thank you wholeheartedly to you and your colleagues for being here today, for making the trip. It's not that far away, but for making the trip here. This is a house that takes very seriously the Green Deal. It takes very seriously this collective priority that is the climate transition. We take it so seriously that we have built a horizontal institute that permeates every area of research and every area of teaching within our institution. So, Maroš, floor to you, and once we've heard you, we will open the floor to the room so that they can grill you a little bit. All right? Give him an applause, please.
Thank you very much, dear Madam Dean, but first and foremost, dear Arantxa, good friend and colleague for many years. Thank you for a warm welcome. And of course, I also would like to wish the good afternoon to you all, and also express my gratitude already in advance that you are interested in politics, in these very important topics, because we need motivated and I would say people with a positive youthful energy, which I know that you have because you are studying at one of the world's most prestigious institutions of learning, and it's very impressive that already 9th consecutive year, if it comes to the QS World University ranking, you are always becoming number one, and of course it deserves the congratulations. And I understand that to get there, that you have to have very strict rules in this house, and I was told about your tradition that you have a specific format for presentations, 10 minutes long, and in 2 parts, with each having 2 subparts. And I know that you are big supporters of talking with very strong Cartesian logic, and therefore some critics of you might tell you that you are speaking Latin. But I know the situation also very well, because very often we who are working for the European Commission are criticized that we are speaking Brusselish or Bruxellois, and therefore I will try to depart from these two traditions and have really very good exchange and discussion with you. As you know, tomorrow the European Parliament will go into recess ahead of the European elections, which will take place in June. This morning I was in Strasbourg and I attended, at least for me, a very moving ceremony because we've been marking 20 years of the biggest enlargement of the European Union ever, and I'm from Slovakia, so I was part of it, and I personally participated in the ceremony in Dublin, in Ireland, when the Slovak flag for the first time was hoisted as a flag of the EU member states. So, as you can see from this, I am around the European affairs for quite some time. I was working 6.5 years as a permanent representative, ambassador to the EU, and since that, believe it or not, I'm commissioner already for 15th year. But I can tell you that I know the transitional year, the mechanics, the usual tension, political debate quite well. But this time, again, I have to say that there is much more of the tension in the air, and therefore I would dare to say that we could feel that Europe stands at the crossroads. The current mandate, stretching back to 2019, was marked by the upheavals, and I would say more so than any other period before. We had major disruptions, we had unpredicted events, and they all played significant role in shaping policy making at both national and EU level. You would still recall the devastating global and very often personal impact of COVID-19 pandemic, and we still go through illegal Russian invasion of Ukraine, and we feel like both these events are sending the shockwaves across the European society, which have been disrupting our economy, but also which have been very much affecting the overall mood and perceptions in our member states. If you just look at all the economic and personal problems caused by this spiraling energy costs, and I can tell you that it was unbelievable crisis management we've been doing in Brussels together with the governments of our member states to address the issues and to make sure that there will be lights, heat, and our economy could function, because we wanted to shift away from Russian gas and oil as quickly as possible. And of course, this make its mark on the households, on the industry, on the cost of living, and therefore I think we should acknowledge the fact that we have this increased anxiety in our societies, and we have to deal with it. On top of, I would say, this perception, we also have to acknowledge that what we've been through was the disruption of the traditional global value chains. Then we are witnessing unfair competition. And of course, we are suffering from production overcapacities outside the European Union. And all this represent altogether unprecedented threats to the competitiveness of our company. And in turn, let's be honest, also it's a threat to our future prosperity. Therefore, we have to act. And I'm very proud to say that despite of all what I just described to you, we have kept delivering on the wider societal shifts, and we didn't blink a moment to work very hard on what is absolutely imperative also for the future to be successful in the green and digital transition. Back in 2019, as you all recall, we launched the European Green Deal as a centerpiece of our fight to achieve climate neutrality with healthy nature by 2050. But also, we have seen and we've been looking at the Green Deal as our strategy for the long-term growth and prosperity. And over the past 4.5 years, we have been putting in place a solid comprehensive legislative framework for this transformation, one that many of our international partners look up to. So I can safely say that we have come a long way. Most of the key proposals have now been adopted, and we are also starting to see concrete results. For example, we have demonstrated that it is possible to actually decouple the economic growth from emissions. We have reduced our emissions by more than a third. I think it's currently at 32.5% if you compare the levels to 1990. And at the same time, our economy grew by almost 70%. So we are the first major global economy which clearly demonstrated that these scissors are possible. You can grow and you can cut your greenhouse gas emissions. And we also achieved a good progress on clean energy. In May 2023, for the first time in the history, the EU produced more electricity from wind and solar than from fossil fuels. Why this is important? Because the renewable power is our indigenous power. It's our sun, it's our wind, and it's generated here in the European Union. And it reduces our dependency on the imports from outside. But at the same time, let's be honest, we have seen the effects of the climate change and biodiversity loss, which are becoming more common and more intense. We have had out-of-control forest fires, droughts destroying swathes of crops, devastating floods such as those experienced in north of France last November. So I think all this is proving our point that we cannot afford to take our foot off the pedal even for a second. Instead, our attention must focus on implementing green measures that have been agreed in a way that is fit to face the new geopolitical reality. And I would like to underscore this sentence. And we need to ensure that the Green Deal is truly European. It means that it leaves no one and nowhere behind, that is fair and just. And for that, we need a whole of a society approach. When I took over responsibility for the European Green Deal back in August of the last year, I committed to reinforcing our engagement with our citizens and with the private sector, so that the European Green Deal would work economically for our businesses and socially for each and every person in our union. If we decided to outsource the green transition, we would be giving away the chance to create high-value jobs and modern, sustainable economic growth. The green transition can only succeed if we also nurture public support for the changes we have to make to the way we produce, the way we consume, and of course, the way we live. But there is a sense that this public acceptance, which has consistently been very strong, is under pressure and requires our urgent attention. And I would go even further, and I would say that when I was describing and discussing our climate policies with my international partners across the world, I always said how privileged we are in the European Union that we have this unparalleled support for our green and climate policies. And I think that we have become a little bit taking it for granted, that we just simply need to nurture the relationship. It's like friendship, it's like marriage. I mean, you have to work on it, you have to communicate about it, and you have to address the issues as they are coming. And therefore, I mean, currently we are in a situation that among our people you could feel that certain fear of the effort and sacrifice which might be required in the future, and that if you will not take good care of it, that this tendency could start to spread. You have seen the recent farmer protests. You have seen the rise in support for populism, which is cultivating resistance to climate policies, and we also see these signs of the wariness among our citizens. So we must continue to cultivate the support of Europeans and European businesses for green policies, and that is why the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen called for a series of the clean industry dialogues and also green dialogues with our citizens. The idea of this dialogue is actually very simple. I mean, what we do here is that we are focusing and deep diving on individual sectors which are the most impacted by the green transition. And we always bring the whole value chain to one table, from suppliers to consumers to innovators to the active NGOs from that sector. And what we are discussing is what we need to overcome the current challenges, how can we remove bottlenecks, and what we can do to unlock investment so we can seize the opportunity offered by the green transition. So far we have organized in this big format 9 dialogues on the clean transition, focusing on hydrogen, on energy-intensive industries, clean tech, critical raw materials, green infrastructure, forest-based bioeconomy, cities, steel, clean mobility, construction, but also on the grids. And I can tell you that these have been very valuable conversations to better understand how European companies can build the business case for decarbonization. And each of these dialogues I conclude with 2 very important remarks. One clearly says, tell us, write us where you see incoherence in our policy making, where you see inconsistencies in our legal acts, or when you feel that the goals, the targets we proposed are technologically impossible or unachievable. We need to have very honest conversation about them. But my concluding remark always is that we are ready to fight for you. We are ready to fight for our industry, because we just don't want only you to stay in Europe, we want you to prosper here, because we want that the Green Deal and green transition would be made in Europe. And I think that's very important for all our sectors. And therefore, if you would ask me what been such a main conclusions from this discussion, was that we need to focus much more on building the business case for the green transition, for the Green Deal, and that Europe's decarbonization must be increasingly driven by market forces in addition to targets and regulation. Therefore, we called in our recent Commission's communication, which was presented to the European Council, the summit of the head of states and government, which was discussing European strategic agenda last week, with a clear call for reinforced industrial approach to deliver on the European Green Deal. And as you noticed, the discussion on what the European leaders would like the EU to do for the next year has started. And one of the conclusions was also clear that they've been calling for the new European competitiveness deal. So as we debate the direction we should take with the green transition in coming years, I see 3 areas where we should focus our action. First, we need a true single market for the European Green Deal to create an internal market for clean tech with competitive sustainability at its core. Second, we need to exploit to the fullest Europe's hefty political and economic weight wherever we can. For example, through the joint purchase of strategic resources and commodities. We have shown this can work with the success of the joint purchase of gas under the EU energy platform, and now we are looking into expanding it to other materials such as hydrogen, but also critical raw materials, but I'm sure we can go further, for example, into all the cable, substations, transformers we would need to upgrade our grids to make sure that by 2050 they can carry 3 times more electricity as today, because we need to electrify all our economy. And third, it's very clear, and we are determined to ensure that European industry stays here in Europe. That is why we are acting to ensure the competitiveness of European businesses, for example, by tackling soaring energy prices, which are now back down to the level seen before the war in Ukraine. But I know that this message, even though welcomed by our industry, is not good enough, because we shouldn't these days compare where our prices been 2 or 3 years ago, but what are the prices in US, in China, because these are our main economic competitors. But therefore, we have to explore all possibilities how to go even further. We need to accelerate the rollout of modern energy and transport infrastructure to ensure that they are fit for economy of tomorrow. And we need to ensure the necessary funding for the green transition and make the access much easier than it is today. So that means providing greater public support, especially to clean tech sectors, and to work very closely with the private sector, because they will have to play the key role in deploying of these investments. You would agree with me that the Green Deal is very much a forward-looking endeavor. It's about building the future. We are planning 20, 30, 40 years in advance. We want to live in a society with clean air, with healthy food, with drinkable water. And we also want that your generation and generation of your children will continue to enjoy livable weather conditions. And therefore, it's very closely linked with the strategic foresight and with this anticipatory governance, which is now very popular among our prime ministers, and it's a new technique which I know we are studying here, and I saw your foresight report on energy, which is very, very impressive, and thank you very much for that work. And this is exactly what we need to do more in the European Union, to learn from our foresighters how to make better, actionable policy making of today with impact on the future coming in 5, 10 or more years. As you probably know, I was the first commissioner who was mandated by the President of the Commission to embed strategic foresight into European policymaking, to strengthen our preparedness and to ensure that our policies would be much more future-proof. And I learned very quickly that strategic foresight is not about having a crystal ball or predicting the future, but rather it helps us to identify potential future trends that might affect us. And it also forces us to think how to be as prepared as we possibly can for the future shocks, whether we are seeing them coming or not. In the past few years, strategic foresight has become a guiding principle in major strategic areas beyond climate policies. For instance, the Critical Raw Material Act and the idea which I just presented to you, that we should jointly purchase critical materials, that we should stockpile them, that we should develop the strategy how to make sure they would not replace our dependency on fossil fuels to the dependency on critical raw materials. The concept of resilience, which we added as a third pillar to green and digital strategies, was developed as a reaction to the shortcomings we have seen in supplying different materials during the COVID-19 crisis. And of course, it was again the foresighters who brought to the political forefront the discussion about strategic autonomy. So the foresight clearly were important and actionable during the last 5 years, and therefore I believe that we should use this ability to help our decision and policymakers to be better prepared for the discussions about the future. We presented a couple of weeks ago our interinstitutional global long-term trends report. And what we have seen there, again, it's a tough reading, but important one, because we see growing fragmentation. We see the big competition among top players, weakening of the rules-based international order. And all this is clearly pointing to the importance to make right choices. We have to be much more resilient. We have to be prepared for these external future shocks, and we have to boost our strategic autonomy and develop our ability to act where, when, and how we choose, especially in the geopolitical dimension of our resilience. But if you allow me to leave you with one idea, because I know that you are deep thinkers. One idea we've been kind of addressing in our strategic foresight is that if the GDP criteria are correctly set, if we shouldn't look for the alternatives, because GDP and accounting standards are with us already for a very, very long times. But if we want to build the new future for this world, we should also look if we are assessing the indicators of the economy in the current, in the appropriate way. Do we factor in enough sustainability, well-being? And we developed different methodologies, but one example I would use was that we considered what the GDP might look like after taking into account life expectancy as a measure of health. So in this case, we would expect the EU's adjusted GDP to increase by 15.5% by 2040, higher than that of US, China, or India. So I think that it just proves that the European social model, the focus we put on the well-being is having also the economic returns. It has also economic price, and therefore I think that as a further studies, analysis, I would leave it as one very important topic for you, the future leaders and the future policy thinkers. Last word of thanking to all of you for being interested in politics, because I know that in Science Po there is 15,000 students. You are probably one of the most engaged young people out there, and that's good, that's great, because as Jacques Delors, the former president of the Commission, and I would say one of the most important EU's visionary, he said, how can we ever build Europe if young people do not see it as a collective project and a vision for their own future? So therefore, we need you. We need you to be active, to be interested, and also we need you to talk to your parents, to your peers, and to help us in this outreach, which would be so important before the next European Parliament elections, but also after that, because the tasks I described to you are intergenerational. They are for a long term, and therefore we need committed smart people who are ready to be active in this very important domain. So therefore, thank you very much for your work, for your studies, for your interest, and to you, Arancha, for your kind invitation. Thank you.
So there are microphones to the right and to the left. So as usual, you know there are no right or wrong questions or answers. There are questions and there are answers. So to the microphone, please briefly tell us who you are and put a question. While you do that, let me recognize in the room also the three sponsors of the European Chair for Sustainable Development and Climate Change, the European Investment Bank, HSBC, and Hermes, without whose kind contribution this chair would not be producing the excellent work that it's producing today under the leadership of Mark. Thank you. Gentleman over there.
Thank you very much for being with us. My name is Henrik. I'm in the MPP for Energy, Environment and Sustainability. I have a question. You were talking a lot about competitiveness, and I have a question regarding the Net Zero Industry Act. The EU has defined 8 strategic sectors in which the EU wants to be a leader in the world. Now I think as of today we're lagging behind China in most of these sectors, which is mostly due to a lack of public finance and also private finance. So I would like to know how you think we can make the European Union competitive in these sectors in the next 5 to 10 years again, by leveraging the necessary finance and subsidies.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, Cedric was the name, yeah? I hope no? Your name was Cedric? Henrik, I'm sorry. So it was a bit of an echo here. No, thank you very much for that question. Indeed, you are right. that we have to be much more strategic in our choices if it comes to the economy. So if you look at this Net Zero Industrial Act, so there are clearly, I would say, the short list of the industries where we need to regain the edge or preserve the edge, or where we need to kind of focus our attention on. And all these industries, you would recall, are very much linked with the economy of the 21st century. We are talking about clean tech, green tech, hydrolyzers, batteries, storing of energies, of course, chip making, and all the areas where clearly we see the huge competition. So what I'm telling to some parts of our sectors, if you allow me the comparison, that we are not competing with Chinese or Americans who would make better diesel car. We are competing who would be able to transit the renewable energy more efficiently, who could be able to store it better, who can produce the green steel, who can manufacture with a lower carbon footprint, and therefore we went for these future-oriented technologies. Now the question, how to finance it. I personally believe that we would need to adjust our competition policy, that we would need to adjust our trade policy, that we need to use in much better way the public procurement in Europe, and what is already in NZIA to dramatically accelerate the permitting process across the Europe. But I didn't want to speak too long because I was already over my time. But I think to respond to your question, I'll just say a couple of sentences about how I see so-called competitive sustainability principle applied across the board. We used it for the first time in battery regulation, second time in a wind energy package, and what it says in a plain language is that if you manufacture with a low carbon footprint sustainably and you treat your workers decently, you should be rewarded for that through public procurement and not punished for it. Not go for the cheapest alternative, which is supplying you the goods from somewhere far away country in Asia. And we need to adjust our policies to this. Enrico Letta, your predecessor, made very important report, which I strongly recommend to you to read. He was just saying that, which was also a surprise for me, that 80% of the public procurement is kind of resulting in bringing the goods outside of the European Union. You know what money we are talking about? Every single year we spend in the EU around 2 trillion euros, 2,000 billion euros, which is 14% of our GDP in public procurement. And I see that if you would simply apply the competitive sustainability principle, as we did with the batteries regulation, that each product placed on new market should have a digital passport, clear statement of the carbon footprint, where the critical raw materials come from, what is your recycling obligations, and of course some other criteria which would kind of distinguish in what world we want to live in the future. I think that we can bring additional investment into make. When I was talking to the electric bus manufacturers, they told me, in US, if you want to supply, to manufacture this yellow school buses, there is very clear condition. 80% must be local content. What we do, we give a lot of money to our cities to improve their public transport, to make sure that this is efficient, that this is low carbon. But of course, what's happening that through also European support money, we are then buying the buses which are coming not from the EU but from other destinations. So simply, these are just a couple of examples, but you understand the logic behind it. And then we had very fruitful discussion with the new leadership of the EIB, and I think that Nadia Calvino is doing the great job, because we need this biggest public bank in the world. I mean, let's repeat it, biggest public bank in the world, bigger than World Bank, bigger than any other bank, to simply be much more proactive in this area. We would like them to help us as they helped our industry, contra guarantees, the risking of the investment, because simply we have to create the market for the green steel, green hydrogen, and get over this stage and make sure that in the course we are not losing European industry, but we are boosting it. And I think these would be the few suggestions I would make to your question.
Thank you. Gentleman over there.
Hello. Yeah. Hello. Thank you to have come today. My name is Nicolas. I'm in International Energy Transitions. I'm also at the Sciences Po Energy Association. So my question would be again on energy. My question comes back to the Ursula von der Leyen's declaration in Mauritania, where she said that Mauritania could produce, thanks to the EU, the green hydrogen it needs, and then produce back the steel to export it to the EU. But so I was feeling very concerned about this declaration and the future, the potential second deindustrialization of the EU. So what are the mechanisms that you envision in addition to the subsidies? Because it feels also on this point we are already well below the Inflation Reduction Act subsidies. So what do you ambition further to combat this potential deindustrialization? Thank you.
I think you're absolutely correct in saying that the energy prices are, I would say, the key factor of a concern for every single sector with whom we had this clean transition dialogues. And therefore I say we shouldn't just look at what are the prices now and just kind of be satisfied with the fact that they are at the pre-war levels, because we see that the energy in China, in United States, it's cheaper than in Europe, and of course it creates a lot of problems. So what to do, I would say, with this? First and foremost, I think we have to look at what is the cost structure of energy in Europe, and I'm sure that you know that 1/3 goes for commodity, 1/3 goes for transmission costs, and 1/3 roughly goes for taxation. So I think we have to also make the political arbitration. What is our priority? And I think we have to look for the ways how we have to simply lower the energy costs, because otherwise it's very difficult for our industry to be competitive. At the same time, I think we have to continue with what we are very good at. We are very good at energy efficiency. I mean, if you look at, I just came from Canada, where we've been negotiating what I hope will be new global treaty against plastic pollution, and of course, if it comes to recycling, we are the best in the world, as we are in energy efficiency. And market design obligations which we adopted brought huge savings to our consumers, because we are buying appliances which simply consume less energy. So I think it's, since 2020, it's roughly 170 billion euros been saved just on energy bills, because we have more efficient appliances. So we need to do and continue to do where we are strong. We are strong in energy efficiency. We are strong in commitment to environment. We are strong in recycling. We have to deal with energy prices, and we have to make sure that we would also increase the power generation in Europe, where we see these very positive tendencies in renewables really playing more and more important role. We have in Europe what I would describe nuclear renaissance. You see that the new projects are being considered at least in half of the member states. And at the same time, and that's, I would say, issue which was a little bit overlooked, and I was discussing with your colleagues who've been working on the Foresight report, the need to upgrade our grids. Because if we are not going to do that, we will end up in the situations like I think a year or 2 years ago in one of the big EU member states, there was a loss of 4 billion euros because the wind energy was produced, but it couldn't be transported to the final consumers, so we had to do so-called curtailment, meaning we lost it. We lost 4 billion euros in 1 year, and we lost the use of that renewable energy. So for that, we need to have the grids which are smart, which are bi-directional, especially if you want to have electric vehicles fleet much stronger, and simply make sure that every electron which we produce is used efficiently. And on green hydrogen in Mauritania, the expectation of the level of the consumption are so high that we want to, of course, achieve our goals for green hydrogen made in Europe. But there is an expectation that we also would need to import the green hydrogen in the future. So I think that the remarks been made in this context. But of course, for us, the priority is to be sure that we will be producing green hydrogen for our needs predominantly in the European Union.
Thank you. We're going to take 2 questions at the time so that we get to all of you. So we'll take one from the gentleman and the other one from the other gentleman.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. My name is Peter. I do a master's in international governance and diplomacy. My question regards agriculture. The Green Deal covers a lot of areas, but one sector which seems to have been not touched upon so much is agriculture, even though this sector is responsible for some 11% of CO2 emissions in Europe. The sector is in no way looking to be sustainable anytime soon. And I was just wondering, is your strategic foresight, or what are your, how do you look towards the future to making agriculture more sustainable? Should it be left up to the member states to find a way? Should there perhaps be an agricultural emissions trading system, or should we not make agriculture sustainable at all and just compensate in a different sector? I would be curious to hear your thoughts.
Thank you. Gentleman over there.
Good afternoon. My name is Benoit, and I'm a Sciences Po student in public policy. During an event on the future of the European industry, co-organized by Euractiv and the European Steel Association on the 9th of April, Kurt van den Berge, so the Director General of DG Clima at the European Commission, said, I quote, "Europe is on track with our goals," speaking of the target of reducing net greenhouse gas emission by at least 55% by 2030. And you said yourself a few minutes ago that we are succeeding in decarbonizing economic growth. But at the same time, the last analysis of national energy and climate plans published just 4 months ago by the same European Commission indicates that the EU is significantly off track from 2030 emission targets. And looking beyond 2030, the gap is even wider. So as a citizen, I would like to understand, is the EU on track for 2030 and beyond? Yes or no?
Okay, so are we on track or off track?
Very good. Both very good questions. So let's start with agriculture. I think this is, of course, very important topic with a high political sensitivity, and I think here we have to combine our empathy, understanding for the sector with, I would say, clear ideas how to deal with the challenges of agriculture in the future. All the issues and all the crises I was describing to you a few minutes ago over the last 5 years been, I would say, even multiplied for the agriculture sectors. And I met with a lot of farmers, and you just see that on top of all what I was describing, they've been going through the process that simply, if you look at grain, also because we wanted to help our Ukrainian friends to find the war and to make sure that they would not lose the global markets. In a grain production, there was a loss, if I recall correctly, from 1 year to another, almost by 20 billion euros on the European level, and that's a lot of money for agriculture sector. Then, of course, a lot of these measures which we've been promoting and we promote been coming as the obligation to the farmers, and they're telling you, look, I mean, we are the first to know that we have a problem with the climate change. We have droughts, we have the floods. We also feel that soil is not as performant as it was before. I was talking to the regional government of Andalusia, and they've been telling me that Currently, the water reservoirs are somewhere at the 20% of they used to be, or in some areas it's even 4%, and they are kind of worried that during the summer they will have to supply the drinking water by cisterns. So they know that the problem is there. So we have to look at it comprehensively, and therefore I'm sure that this would be one of the topic for the discussion for the next commission. But if you ask for my foresight, what I personally feel we would need to look at is to develop, I would say, this next stage of the common agriculture policy in a much closer interaction with the community of farmers, of forest owners and forest managers. I also think that we need to look for kind of sustainability criteria to be monetized. What I mean by that is that I'm sure that you are following the discussion on so-called carbon removal certificates. So if you have a forest owner who clearly is responsible, and we can calculate today how much of the carbon went through this forest thing and help us actually to clean up the air. If you are the farmer who respects all the environmental laws, and in this way is kind of reducing the carbon footprint of the production, I think that it should be remunerated. It should be rewarded on top of, I would say, the traditional levels. And I hope that we can use the mechanism of the carbon removal certificates. And then, of course, there are more, I would say, sensitive and political choices, and some of them are already been addressed in France, but not in other parts of Europe. And this is shouldn't we do something in the farmers are pushed to sell their products before the cost of production? These are, I would say, as well as I would say again, very, very, very sensitive topic in France, but also in other parts of Europe. How to address the exports of the agricultural production when we know that they are not fulfilling even, I would say, half of the rules and environmental approaches which we have in Europe. So therefore, what I'm saying, this is a very complex issue which have to be discussed in detail, and I'm sure that common agriculture policy will be adjusted to the lessons learned, to the fact that we, and I say it as a commissioner, we are also subjecting farmers to my days to too much of the reporting obligations, and we need also to adjust to the modern technology. Just one example for you when we are talking about foresight. I think that today with satellite imagery and with artificial intelligence, I think we can very easily detect if the forest was there last year, if the forest is still there this year, and if that's the case, we do not need to do anything. I'm talking about, let's say, the deforestation process. We can also check, how the farmers are treating their farms, their forest, and therefore I think that we can develop the mechanism that even with the help of artificial intelligence who can compare these images, we do not have to subject our farmers to, I would say, paper reporting, which we then have to check and control and so on and so forth. So we would need also to adjust as a commission, as a regulators, how we are going to work with the data, what we would like to ask for them just to simply alleviate the burden. So simplification, monetization of the good behavior, fair treatment by the retail sectors, and of course looking for the ways how we can bring more money, more income to the farmers community. And to the gentleman who would like to say yes and no, I would say yes, because he wanted to know if we are on track to get to minus 55% of greenhouse gas reduction. And I also can say that our initial projections mean that we would do even a little bit better, that we would get into the minus 57%. But I have to acknowledge that the gentleman is right in the fact that when we assess the first batch of national energy and climate plans, they've been below the bar. So what we are doing right now is what we call in Brussels iteration process. So it means that we are talking to our member states, each one of them, and we want to make sure that through this mutual discussion, through the, I would say, sharing of the knowledge and sharing of the efforts of each and every member state that by the end of the June we will have the national energy and climate plans in a shape where we can also present them very proudly to the international community that we are delivering, we are respecting our own rules, and then we will be at -55%.
Thank you. And the last two questions, briefly, so that...
Ďakujem najprv za vaše poznámky a že ste našli čas pre nás. I'm Alex. I study international security, and I have a question about the future of the European Green Deal, also in regard to the European elections. So in the past, we've seen that there's been quite a growing reluctance of especially conservative parties and countries to push for ambitious European green legislation. And given that there's an anticipated shift to the right after the elections, I was wondering whether you see the European Green Deal under threat or not. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Johanna. I study international governance and diplomacy, and my question is about the Critical Raw Materials Act. So it's often said that the EU likes to regulate, whereas the US, for instance, uses more fiscal tools, as we can see right now with the IRA. And there are very ambitious targets until 2030 to very rapidly ramp up the recycling and processing capacities in Europe, for instance. And it's often said that this seems quite unrealistic to achieve. So I was just wondering what your thoughts are in this, whether these targets are actually perhaps overly ambitious, or is this on purpose that we kind of aiming a tad too high? Yeah, would be curious to hear. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Alex. I would like to thank for perfect Slovaks, and I guess she didn't learn it at Sciences, so she most probably my compatriot, and so I would really greet her from the podium and appreciate the question. Of course, I mean, if you look at the topics which I think you already see in the pre-election debate, it's very much about the cost of living standards, it's very much about the migration, but it's also very much about the European Green Deal in all aspects. And I think that here our approach should be that we have to present the European Green Deal in a way which is, let's say, less focus on the concrete targets, on the concrete policies, but as a matter of, I would say, survival of the human race on this planet. I mean, I was myself surprised when I learned that Europe is actually overheating twice as fast than any other continent in the world. We might not feel it that much, but clearly this is happening, and we see all. Even though I agree that today probably it's not the day, but overall, if you look at the temperature, this is simply the case. And then, of course, on these major goals, I think I didn't detect, and I'm really meeting a lot of people, citizens, business leaders, stakeholders, that anyone is doubting the need to tackle the climate change. The thing is, what we can do to make, I would say, this transition socially fair, that the people would not be worried about the costs, about the difficult personal choices they have to make, how we can strengthen, I would say, the social aspect of the transition. And then, of course, how can we work more closely with our businesses, with our industrial leaders, that Europe, as it is today, would remain to be one of the top 3 economies, whatever happens in the next decade, and of course be very important manufacturing and industrial power, as we have always been. And therefore I'm talking, and therefore the leaders are talking so much about the competitiveness and about, you know, how to develop this business case and adjust, I would say, the level of assertivity and agility of our political decision to what I think we have seen over the last 5 years is kind of acceleration of very, very tough, very rough geopolitics and geoeconomics. And on the Critical Raw Material Act and the situation, I agree with you that the goals are pretty high, and therefore what we are doing is that we are trying to tackle this very important priority for us from different angles. You will see that in, I think, 2 or 3 weeks, we will set up the steering board for implementation of the Critical Raw Materials Act. So it will have the political body, ministers responsible for these sectors, but there will be very strong also industrial level. And we are working already now on the list of the projects within the European Union with fast permitting procedures, and we want to have this process culminating in making sure that these projects on the list would be properly screened, and once they are approved, they got so-called seal of being strategic European project, which means that we have to help you with feasibility studies. We have to look together for the off-takers. We have to help you with the financing, and we have to use everything we have in, let's say, our arsenal and instruments to make this project lifting off, from the ground. At the same time, I know that definitely not everything we can get from European Union. So we are working very closely with our neighbors. Ukraine can supply us with everything we need. We signed the memorandum of understanding with Greenland. We are working on, let's say, new cooperation in this field with Serbia and with Kazakhstan and many other countries. And I'm glad to say that member states see the strategic importance of this also in the form of financing. Germany, Italy, France, and European Commission, we have such an incubator accelerator which is called InnoEnergy. Each one of them already has set up the funds from 500 million to 2 billion euros, and I believe that this would be also the financial firepower which, when combined with EIB, national promotional banks in our member state, that we can start moving in the right direction. Of course, here again, the yearly engagement with especially the local communities in the form of permitting, social acceptance would be very important. And if you allow me, I will just complement my last answer by anecdote, because we've been discussing with one NGO how to deal with the phenomenon of NIMBY, not in my neighborhood. And she had very good answer, because she told me, just change it into PIMBY, please, in my neighborhood. Talk to the local leaders, develop the economic model, make it the project which is good for everyone living in the area, and you will see that the social acceptance would increase and the attitude of the people will change. So it was the last question, my last answer, and more or less we are on the time. So I really would like to thank you very much for your active participation, for your attendance, for great topic to put for the discussion, excellent timing, and of course, always kind reception I'm getting from Arantxa. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maroš. You were very diplomatic. Because I am less of a diplomat these days, to the question on the elections, yes, it will matter. Alex, you asked this question. It will matter that we decide to go and put our ballot in the box, and it will matter a lot that we read the little print on the different options on the table. And I do think this is an issue on which I will myself pay a very close look. Just a hint. On this, thank you, Maroš. Keep up the good work. Thank you for all that you do. We know that it's not easy. We know that it's not always thankful, but we want you to leave this place with a very clear mandate to keep up the work and the ambition. And on this, I'll pass the floor on to Claire. Don't go, because Maroš leaves. We'll take him to the door, but the discussion on the Green Deal continues. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Quoi?
Okay, can you hear me? Is this working? No? Is this working? Yes, much better. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Claire Lejeune. I'm a PhD student in the Center for European Studies here in Sciences Po, and I'm also a former student in PSIA, so I have links with many institutions who co-organized this very important event, and it will be my pleasure and honor to chair and moderate the second part of this event. So after Mr. Šefčovič's important contribution, this second part will bring to the floor voices both from politics and from academia, who I think will help us further decipher the state of affairs regarding the European Green Deal around this question, reinventing the deal, what political space for the ecological transition in the next European legislature. So without further ado, because we're quite constrained time-wise, I would like to present the panelists we have with us tonight and also take the opportunity to thank them for being here with us tonight. So we have with us Barbara Pompili, a former French Minister of Ecological Transition. Also, we have Marcin Kołek with us, former Minister of Environment in Poland. Christina Pinasco, who's an economist from the Center of Climate Change of the Banque de France, and also an associate professor in public policy at the University of Cambridge. Matthias Tiemann, a colleague from the Center of European Studies, where he's a professor for European public policy. And last but not least, Mark Ringel, who's the chairholder at the European Chair for Sustainable Development and Climate Transition here in Sciences Po. And Sébastien Dreyer, the director of IDRI, will provide us with the conclusive remarks after this first debate. So, for the first half hour, I will be putting a few questions to our panelists. And then in the second part, in the second half hour, you will have the opportunity to ask your own questions. So please take note of them so that you can come up and make your contribution also. I'm going to start with a question to Barbara Pompili. Thank you for being with us. So as a former Minister for the Environment here in France, and also now as a key player in the French strategy for ecological planning within the SGPE, can you give us a sense maybe of what the European Green Deal meant for French climate policies, especially given the context with the lessons learned from the Gilets jaunes movement also? And maybe also, how do you now view the future of the European Green Deal in the context of the European elections?
Okay, in 3 minutes. Okay.
You can have 5.
Thank you. No, but I think it's very important to answer to the students' questions. So for me, the European Green Deal is clearly a game changer. It's the first time we have a European framework to tackle climate change. And I think it's very important because for me, it's the reason why European Union is so important, and we have to keep it like this. We have to vote in June because it is the basis for our policies. And clearly, to tackle climate change, if we are not together, it is not possible to be an actor on the international scene, clearly. And this framework, we were part of the building of this framework. I remember when I was minister, we had a very important role to play during the French presidency of the European Union, and I was chairing the energy and the environmental Council, and at this moment I saw some countries very interested in this framework because it clearly helps some countries who are not ready yet for these changes we are facing, and European can help them to change their view, to help people to understand where they are going, and if we want to implement it at the national level, we need to have this framework. And it's an ambition, and we have to keep in mind that this ambition is seen in other parts of the world. And I'm pretty sure that if we didn't have a European Green Deal, we wouldn't have some very interesting results in COPs, like the Glasgow COP or the Global Biodiversity Framework, for example, in Montreal. These results are there because European Union was there and was strong with the European Green Deal. And of course we can think that we are just a little part of the greenhouse gas emissions. I hear that too much. Europe is not a big emitter. France is not a big emitter, so why do we need to do these efforts to reduce our greenhouse gas emission? Because we have a footprint, because we are responsible for what is happening elsewhere, and because if we don't do that at our level, how can we explain to other countries like India, like China, like African countries that they have to change the way they are acting on climate issues? It's not possible. But when I say that, I clearly don't underestimate the difficulties of implementation. And this is why there are so many problems right now during this campaign. That's why we are talking about backlash. Why are we talking about backlash? Because it is difficult to reach an agreement on goals, but it's much more difficult to implement without leaving anyone behind, as Maroš Šefčovič said. It is very difficult because it is not just one sector you have to change. It is clearly a narrative that you have to change. You have to tell people that if we change some little things, it is not possible to succeed. We have to think about the future we are facing, and we have to put in place some tools and to put in place a new policy and to build a new world. And I think it is very interesting, because if you do that, you change the fear of future that so many people are facing into the idea of participate to something bigger than us. And I tell you that because when I was minister, I saw so many people telling me that they didn't know where their place was in the future. And when I was younger, I was born in the north of France, in a city called Lens. And in Lens, there is a football team, very interesting. But of course, there are coal mines. There's no coal mines anymore, but when I was younger, I'm so old, there were coal mines. And it is very interesting to see this example, because this example can be replicated in other countries or in other sectors. My grandfathers were coal miners, and they were very proud of their job. They lose their health. They died about breath problems, and they lost their energy. It was a very, very hard job. They were but they were proud because they were part of the effort to build the economic growth of their countries, to build their country. And this pride was completely forgotten when at one moment some people told them, you are not part of this movement anymore. You are not useful anymore. Thank you for the job, but we don't need you anymore. And it is very brutal, it is terrible for these people. And I think we underestimate completely that this is happening in so many sectors in our country, but in other countries too. I think we have a former minister of Poland. There are a lot of miners, of coal miners in Poland. I'm sure they are very proud of what they did to help their country to have an economic growth. But now they are very anxious about their future. What will my children do? What will be their place in the future we are building? And I think if we give an answer to these people, I'm sure these people will go to vote to this election and vote in a good way for me. And the narrative we are building on the Green Deal and on all the ecological transition policies has to be built on that idea that there are some people in our countries who want to understand what they will do in the future. Just that. And how will be the future for them and for their children. As a mother, I'm not sure my daughter, which is 20, will have a better future than me. My parents were sure I will have a better future from them. And so, this is a question, the most important question, the social aspect of the transition has to be taken into consideration. It was too long, I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. Moving now to Marcin Korolek, to another part of the European landscape, much better. And with a transition that was already in the last part of what you were saying, Barbara Pompili, about the coal mines also. So you were Minister for the Environment and then for the Climate in Poland between 2011 and 2015, so at a time when climate policies looked quite different in the EU than they do now. So could you tell us a little bit about how the European Green Deal changed things for countries like Poland, and how do you see this evolving in years to come and with the results, the potential results of the next elections?
Thank you. First of all, thank you for the invitation. And I will start with the sentence that I think we should be proud of European Green Deal. It is practically done. I mean, the end of the legislative term of the European Parliament is ended probably today or maybe tomorrow, but it is done. And that was probably the biggest one process legislation, one goal legislation adopted in the history of European Union. And I personally am admiring civil servants with those thousands of pages of different legislation, and they did it, or we did it. So we should be proud of it, first of all. And that is legislation adopted. And that is also the way European Union did economic policies for a number of years. And that works. That works. We should maybe ask today if that is working anymore. I mean, that works in a time when the question of the biggest automotive corporation was the competition between Volkswagen and Toyota. But today, the competition, who will be the biggest car company in the world, is between BYD and Tesla. None of it is European one. And if we look from outside the different approach to economic policies in the world, we have this US approach. US is innovating, China is imitating, Europe is regulating. And I think we should admit that our competitive advantages are shrinking, and it is a polite way to frame it, in my understanding, because in those industries which need to deliver Green Deal objectives, we are not ahead of our partners, let's say that way. So the main question today, in my understanding, is whose industry, whose workers will deliver those our legal objectives? And those legal objectives under the Green Deal probably will not be changed, because that will be quite difficult to change it. You need council, you need commission, and you need a parliament. And that next parliament will be not very, very different from this one. So we need this new industrial policy for industrialists and for business and for industries, but we need it also for us here for you. I mean, the question about European social model, about how we will live, and if we will put the part of the next industry here in Europe, or we will import that from the outside. I will stress the Antwerp Declaration and this move of different industry, and Antwerp Declaration, you probably know the idea of the Belgian presidency declaration signed by all the more than 1,000 different European companies. And there are two very interesting ideas there. Let's create so-called industrial development fund first, and second, let's create an omnibus act which will simplify European legislation without losing the objectives. And I will put an accent on this industrial development fund. I think if we will aim to create such a new instrument, an industrial transition fund, we should ask ourselves about a distribution key of those assets between member states. The traditional way is wealth per GDP, wealth per capita of different member states. So countries of our region are benefiting most because we are poorer. But I think in this industrial development fund, the distribution key should be very different. Should be industrial part of the GDP creation of different countries. We should invite those countries who have the biggest industry to be part of this transition and to benefit from this transition. And in my personal understanding, the biggest benefiter should be Germany. The second, probably France or Italy. Third, probably Spain. The fourth, maybe Poland. I mean, we should invite those countries who has the biggest industry to be the biggest benefiter. I don't know how to say. Why? Germany and France has the biggest state aid for the industries anyhow. Better to have them in the European system than to demolish a single market. We should have European way to do that. But it is not all. We should protect our borders as well. I don't know if you remember how the level of U.S. Border taxes for imports of cars to the U.S. It is 27.5%. Europe has 11%. So those Chinese cars are going to the U.S. They are just the protection is too high, so they are going to Europe. We should do the same. Thinking about this new industry policy, we should also somehow try to copy the IRA pattern. IRA is extremely simple. You don't have a concours, you don't have a competition for it. You're just sending an information to your tax office. My products reduce CO2 by X, so please send me Y number of tax credits to my account. That's all. No competition, no uncertainty, just automatic system. And second difference is that EU is helping for investments. IRA is helping for operating costs, which is a taboo in state aid, European state aid policy for now. Should be somehow adjusted. And to finish, I hope that this Antwerp Declaration will be part of the nexus of European conversation after elections, and I hope that will be part of conversation about the new program of the European Commission, and I also hope that will be part of Polish presidency. Polish presidency will start 1st January next year, where the program of the next 5 years of European institution will be settled. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Moving now to voices who work on the Green Deal within academia and research. To start, maybe with Christina. So you've built your expertise in the economics of climate policies, and how have you perceived what Ursula von der Leyen described as a man on the moon moment of Europe? And does the European Green Deal indeed introduce structural changes in economics of climate policies? And from that perspective, how do you see potential challenges ahead of the European Green Deal?
Well, thank you very much. First of all, let me say the main disclaimer: when you work for a central bank, this is my sole opinion, and it doesn't represent in any way the opinion of my employer. And continue with your question, Claire. I think I will tackle it in two different ways. So actually, I found that analogy with the man in the moon pretty interesting for different reasons. One more positive, another one a little bit less negative, and I will talk about this in an anecdotal way. I hope so. So first, the strategy of the European Union towards decarbonization and climate goals has been traditionally characterized, and we have already, I think, talked a little bit about this, by the use of sticks, the use of mandatory and regulatory approaches, and not surprisingly, the European emission trading system was the first actual general or international carbon emission market worldwide. However, this European Green Deal includes way more than that. It's trying to go beyond. It's trying to approach as well and talk to what we call also carrots, financial and fiscal incentives and subsidies to both R&D infrastructure, and also, R&D investments, but also infrastructure development and deployment. This is something, we have also mentioned this already, that many other countries are doing for longer. So we have the example of the US with Inflation Reduction Act, putting in place more than 360, I think, billions of dollars to promote climate and energy policies. Yet in the case of the European Union, I think we are talking about a way more comprehensive approach that includes both types of policy instruments, not only subsidies, but as I just mentioned, fiscal and regulatory approaches at the same time. We are talking about policy mixes and possibly a mix of policies at the same time to tackle different externalities that we are living right now in the European Union. We are talking about stringent or more stringent emission reduction goals. We are talking about more ambitious renewable energy goals, several new directives, importantly the one on energy efficiency, and I would like to highlight this one because we talk a lot about energy efficiency and maybe we should talk as well about energy sufficiency. And in the middle of all this, we have a promise of mobilizing more than 1 trillion of euros in sustainable investment with the Just Transition Plan, with Invest Europe funds, just to cite some of the examples. This represents a massive challenge, above all not at the European level, but as a way of coordinating also the implementation at the country level once all these regulations, while all these directives have passed. Obviously, all this without mentioning the enormous polarization moment that we are living these days, and we have started already talking about the European elections that will take place in June, but I probably, Professor Timman will mention this later on more in detail. There are these challenges, but there are also technological challenges in the way. We have to integrate more renewables in the grid. We have to boost significantly our investment in technology and innovation in a context of high debt, and important economies in Europe are very high in their debt rates. Just as an example, Italy, France, or Spain, to mention some. We are doing some good things. We are already generating our gross final consumption of renewable energy is already 25% of all the consumption that we do, but there are still some negative impacts here that we are seeing during the last years. For example, we have increased the level of people that are not able to keep their homes warm from 7% to 9.3% during the last year. And this is the social aspect that we really need to tackle if we want the European Green Deal to deliver and to involve and get engaged into this idea of a just transition for everyone. We need to tackle energy efficiency, we need to tackle energy sufficiency, and try to communicate. And I think that's my last message, continuing with a little bit the social aspect, trying to tackle the communication challenge that we are facing with the general or average citizen. And here the anecdote. Why I don't think the man in the moon comparison is the best comparison to make. Because according to a survey that was done by the project Tresca in Europe in 2021, still 25% of the citizens believe that the man in the moon spectacle was a hoax. Mm-hmm. They believe it's false. And we are not in a position to allow that 25% of our citizens believe that this European Green Deal is a hoax, that we are not going to deliver, and that this is going to be something bad for them. More urgently, or more importantly, the same question in our neighbor country, the UK, the younger generations were more prone to say this was false, the man in the moon landing didn't happen, than the older generation. This is extremely important for the future electoral processes that we are about to face in June. We don't want to miscommunicate. We need to engage the public, and maybe we need to take into consideration not only the climate goals in order to appeal to this public, but also what is calling to their hearts. Okay, cheaper energy, We have, or we know now, that renewable energy or electricity generated with renewable energy is cheaper than with fossil fuels. We know that we want less dependency from imports from countries in conflict. We might want more independency when we live in rural areas and we cannot trust in grids. These are the type of messages, beyond climate in itself, that we can use in order to attract the whole public or the general, our average citizen, into what the European Green Deal can offer. Because it can actually offer climate benefits and benefits for the economy. Because if we don't take into consideration these goals, the problem is that there will not be a future to work with or a nature to rely on in order to create the competitive advantages that we are all mentioning in this room. Back to you.
Thanks a lot. My next question will go to Matthias Thiemann. So in your work, you pay much attention to how political expertise is built up and how public policies are devised on this basis. So is the European Green Deal, in your sense, an example of expert-led, potentially technocratic policies with the risks that this can pose? And in this perspective, how do you see the politics of the European Green Deal in the sense of the way it manages or not to connect with social movements and the European society as a whole, with issues of communication also that Christina was mentioning just now?
Yeah, does this work?
Yeah, you can.
Thank you very much. I think we've witnessed a very impressive Eurocratic speech earlier at 5 p.m. today here. We heard a lot about markets, we heard a lot about incentives, we heard a lot about competitiveness. We didn't hear much about the backlash that we are bringing in right now, much more. I think it's very symptomatic for a relationship between the public and the European Union that is one of technocratic expertise indeed. And I think it's by historical accident that we're sitting here and we have actually many positive things to report about the European Green Deal, because it is the recovery and resilience facility caused by COVID that gave fiscal firepower to the European Green Deal. Because it's more than 30% of the recovery and resilience facility that has to be devoted to green. Let's imagine an alternative world in which this hadn't happened. So let's imagine a world in which COVID hadn't happened, which evokes many beautiful fantasies immediately, I know. But in terms of the European Green Deal, we would have been left with regulation and regulation alone. No direct investment, no immediate push, only regulation, only market incentives, only the dream of carbon certificates that we're going to deliver by changing the incentives of rational market actors. And this is what the European Union initially offered, and I think we would have seen rather dismal results. And in that case, the recovery and the resilience facility really helped. But why am I speaking about technocratic expertise against populism, possibly, is also if we think about the just transition mechanism and the just transition that we speak so much about, we have to witness two facts, I think. The first one is that the European Green Deal is really based on the emission trading system. This is the backbone of the European Green Deal. What does it mean? It means that you're seeking to force a society to internalize a negative externality. Society now is supposed to pay for the negative consequences that it imposes on society, and in the process to change itself towards this new, green, sustainable economy. However, there is an immediate and obvious question. If you have to internalize a negative externality, somebody has to pay for it. Well, who is going to pay for it in the European Union and how? Is going to operate through the emission trading system that all kinds of societal actors are supposed to pay, and that is going to be expanded to transport, to housing, to building, and so on. And is going to, the price of carbon, the carbon emissions is supposed to go up. It's planned. You can find how much it's supposed to go up, and the European Commission will enforce that. And interestingly, it will all affect, and maybe I'm wrong here, but I think it will affect all of us equally. Well, if you are living in an unequal society and a measure is affecting all of us equally, it is by definition an unequal measure. It is by definition almost not just and not fair. So let's start by the fact that the mechanism, which is the market-based mechanism, that we impose it is not just and not fair. And yet, at the same time, to have a little bit of irony and the rules of history here, of course, if you put in front of everybody and say, look, we're all going to be much worse off, but we're going to save this planet, it's going to be very difficult to make people move. So the way that the European Commission has chosen to go about it is by implementing a system that people do not see, have a very hard time to understand what it actually is, and will hit us in 3, 4, 5 years from now. And if you speak to DG Climate and other people in the Commission, they tell you, well, he's done. He's done. He's already in the law. The price of carbon is going to go up, and that will have the steering effect. And when you tell him that maybe people will not accept a man-made law that imposes misery upon them, they are suddenly looking at you as if you're telling them something that is even unfathomable. As if human beings could not come together and say that they made a political decision, but they can revoke it. And I think we're facing this danger today with the backlash, which is people will come back and say, I do not agree with a price of carbon like this for housing. And Christina evoked the people that cannot heat their houses already today. And that is the carbon price has not kicked in yet. The real carbon price that is supposed to come. And we need to talk about this. And we need to talk about what a just and fair transition should look like. And it's the amazing thing about the Commission. On the one hand, here's the contradiction. On the one hand, we are on the way. And I think every one of us should be happy that we are on the way and something has happened. So I'm not saying nothing has happened. And yet, what we haven't had is a real debate about how a just and fair transition should look like. And who should pay more for it? Because there is a distributive aspect in this transformation. Simply by the fact that if you want to internalize a negative externality, somebody has to pay for it. And the question is, who pays for it? And the answer by the European Commission today is everyone. And then you add one thing. The Commissioner today spoke a lot about competitiveness, about industry, about business. In a more ancient language, we could say the capital, okay, is supposed to benefit from this transition because that was his focus. It was not the people. And I think it's normal because he's not elected. He's not an elected politician. But the question is, how do we organize a debate in which we get a transition that is accepted by society, in particular by the lower ranks of society that for the moment are supposed to pay up for it as much as everybody else. And yes, I know there's a just and fair transition mechanism, and I will end on that, but the just and fair transition mechanism is absolutely insufficient. It is incapable of addressing the problems, and we need a constructive, sometimes antagonistic, but we need a constructive way of dealing with it. And I also want to end on an anecdote. It's an anecdote about French politics and French policies and not European ones. But you may know that a certain kind of car is not supposed to be on the roads any longer from 2025 onwards. I think it's the 4 or 5 category of cars. And recently at the Grand Oral here, we had a student that was in Seine-Saint-Denis, and she came with the people that are supposed to enforce this, and we looked at her and she said, look, 50% of the cars at Seine-Saint-Denis are supposed to be stopped in 2025 because they are no longer in line with the environmental regulation. There is no way unless you want to start a civil war, because you are going to confiscate 50% of the cars of Seine-Saint-Denis, which is a neighborhood that is not exactly known for its wealth, yeah? What are you going to do? And in that conversation, we saw that means were devised. People started to think about, okay, how can we transform a 4 car, category 4, into a category 3 car? How do we engineer a local transformation of these cars such that they can continue to ride and so on? But these kind of debates, which are really crucial, instead of being out in the open, they are led by scared technocrats that anticipate the future consequences of their actions. And we need to have them out also in the open, I think, and to engage and to be like, look, we are going to transform these cars in a way that is affordable for you And that does not force you to buy an electric car that you cannot afford, that you cannot charge because you don't have a house. And so I think we need much more democratic debate, and the EU has gotten us going in a very technocratic fashion and going about these things. But if we want to sustain the transition, we really need a democratic debate out in the open on how we are going to get there without any disdain from a bourgeois elite that doesn't understand why people don't just buy electric cars. Let them buy electric cars is not gonna save us. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Matthias. And to finish, Mark Ringel, I think maybe your perspective will be quite complementary to that of Matthias's. So in your position as the European Chair for Sustainable Development and Climate Transition, you have studied the Green Deal in much depth, and you have had a particular focus on the social and economic implications of it. So how do you see the situation of the Green Deal also regarding the risks of backlash or, yes, of pushback regarding the green policies that it's implementing?
Yeah, maybe as an economist, starting with the economics of it, I mean, maybe looking back at the Green Deal, I mean, we have to acknowledge that actually that was an astounding policy strategy. I mean, at the beginning, when I saw it first, I thought, what is that? It's a mixed bag of fruits. I mean, mobility, buildings, transport, energy efficiency, all of it mixed together. Does it make sense? Well, I can happily say now on the podium I was wrong. It does make sense, and to an astounding amount, really. We've heard quite a bit about the word foresight, and that is really also what counts for the economics of it. I mean, if you think about it sort of disrespectfully, I mean, the Green Deal started off as a transformation strategy, a self-empowerment strategy, in the sense of let's transform while events outpace us and we get transformed by other jurisdictions, you know, being more competitive, by climate policies, etc. Then as a next level, and that gave us a strategy on climate policies combined with the growth element, you know, which elements can we grow on and do decarbonization, net zero 2050, I mean, extremely ambitious. Then came COVID, as Matthias was pointing out. Suddenly these guidelines on, you know, which sectors to develop turned into guidelines for investment decisions. You know, we weren't unprepared when suddenly, I mean, with Next Generation EU, we literally had billions of money to spend to push our economies. Where should we spend it on? Green Deal gave the answers. So suddenly, I mean, that was, I mean, the sort of you know, intellectual guidelines for recovery strategy. Russia, the Russian aggression of Ukraine, the energy crisis, at least in some of our countries. So suddenly this Green Deal, energy efficiency, turning to you, Christina, this Green Deal turned into actually a stabilization strategy in terms of stabilizing European energy markets. Here again, same thing, the same framework, but suddenly energy security policies. So this Green Deal was like a sort of chameleon transforming into anything and everything that we needed, which I suppose is as much as you can ask for from an economic strategy. So in that sense, I mean, the economics of it were astounding, or the intellectual power of the foresight in economics were astounding. Will it need to develop? Yes. We will not stop with the Green Deal, so probably let's see how it's going to be relabeled, new industrial deal, industrial and social deal to be seen. But clearly, I mean, the thing has to evolve to the next level. And we've heard two arguments already on the podium here. One very strong argument is the social side. So to the second part of your questions, have we been doing good on the social side of it? Echoing Barbara, no, we didn't. Or at least to some extent. Pourrait mieux faire. That's pretty much it. We've been good at, and I think the Commission was interestingly open about saying, well, this transformation isn't just fun, win-win, as it's, I mean, very often presented. You know, you just do a non-brainer, it's going to be win-win-win for anything and everything. They were very clear about saying this transformation is ambitious and it'll hurt if we really push it through. I mean, Matthias' argument. And it is hurting. It is coming to the point when it is hurting. But we do not have the full set of strategies to actually sort of buffer up that hurt. We've been very good in devising EIB, devising policies for transformation of the coal sector. Loads of intellectual power went into that, and we've got pretty nice blueprints which can work across the board. But the coal sector means sort of, killing off one sector softly and then turning it to something else. The automotive industry, probably in terms of growth and competitiveness, we wouldn't want to kill it. We would want to transform it. Where's the concept? We're not there yet. Very much for the other sectors, developing green hydrogen across the board. Where's the concept? Yes, we have it, a little extent. So here again, loads of things where we still need to get better and loads of things which we need to look into. So probably, the sort of squaring the circle and the next round of this Green Deal is to be, again, this sort of sustainability question. How can we have something which is ecologic? So here again, not going back and stepping back from the decarbonization. Climate change won't go away, but how can we do that from the economic side, keeping industry sectors alive, decarbonized industry sectors alive, and third level of that, keeping that socially acceptable to people. Because we've seen, we are seeing the backlash, we are seeing the fear. That's the farmers, that's the energy bills, that's, inflation, etc. And we have to take care of that. Otherwise, here again, the strategy won't work. So the Green Deal is dead. Long live the Green Deal in the next level and in the next twist. Back to you, Claire. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much. I'll maybe leave the floor to Sebastian. Okay. Yes. So we're going to move to the questions and answers from the audience. So if you want to please move up to the two microphones that are on either side of the room for those who have questions.
Hi. Sorry, I'm just gonna. My question is mostly to Professor Peñasco and Thiemann. Basically, Professor Peñasco, you were talking about bringing up, messages that appeal to the hearts of people. So those simple messages, I would say perhaps populist messages, to be cynical, that energy can be cheap through the Green New Deal. And then on the other side, we were hearing those questions from fellow students earlier, where I must say I understood 50% of it, because energy is such a highly complex field where there's just kind of no way around those experts, the Commission, finding complex solutions. And my question is, how can those two extremes, like finding complex solutions, at the same time convincing the public at large of the necessity of those solutions, how can they two be married together, and then which role does public engagement play in that process? Thank you.
Okay, do you want to answer now, or shall we take another question? You can answer now. Okay.
Thank you very much for the question. No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean populist messages. I really mean speaking truth, scientific evidence to the core or what moves people. I just will give an example, and it's at the more between countries than intra-country level. I was a couple of years ago in a Commonwealth meeting, and there was students in the audience. One of the students was very vocal about why in Africa we have to engage with these messages of the different COPs, with climate change, with reducing emissions, if we don't emit. And you look at them and it's like, yeah, you're right, but there are many different things, and I really believe this, and I have studied this for some years, that much of the options that we will have in the future in the fight against climate change can benefit from an economic and developmental perspective, or a majority of people. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't forget of those losers. There will be losers, but there are policy instruments that we have studied that are able to reduce such trade-offs, and if not transform them into co-benefits, at least leave people in a neutral position, changing, for example, the taxation goals from carbon to another type of taxes, the other way around. So it's not about populist messages. Energy is not necessarily going to be cheap, but it's true that generating energy now with wind and with solar is cheaper than with fossil fuels. We need to tackle the infrastructure of the electricity system to make this reflect, or that this reflects actually in the prices that people perceive. It's true that if we have a grid system in rural areas, we will be able to not depend on cuts in the grids that will generate some particular problems in communications. It's true that if we install a heat pump, we will see our bills reduce. Energy efficiency will work on that front, and we can save hundreds of euros in our bill by the end of the year. Of course, to install this heat pump, not everybody can afford this, so that's why we need to think in a systemic way on how to tackle this problem with the provision of grants or loans, who is going to be more vulnerable, who is not, and therefore trying to, that's why I meant speak to what actually matters to people on that front with real and scientific messages, but in a clear, in a very clear way, I would say.
Would you like to answer also?
Thank you. And then, well, the role of public engagement, I think the role of justice is really crucial, and justice understood here as an answer as to what this transition actually gives to the people. And I would like to evoke actually what we can learn from the New Deal, because the New Deal is underlying this Green Deal. I mean, and we didn't hear much about it. What was the New Deal? I mean, it was a big question, not that I could fully answer it, right? But the New Deal was definitely a new proposition to American workers. It was saying we are going to take care of, the state will step in and will take care to some degree of you. And also the state did address an environmental and ecological crisis in the Dust Bowl. Yeah, I mean, we have 1 million people in the US that are planting trees in the 1930s. But there is a narrative element of it that speaks to justice and that undergirds the New Deal. And if we do not have this in Europe, then the Green Deal will die. It will remain a technocratic idea that will hit the realities of the purse string, when people will say, I will not stand for this. I want a warm house, and I will not accept this. And so rather than excluding this from view, we need to integrate it. We need to generate a narrative of justice that is, at least to some degree, also meeting the materialist requirements of being accepted as such. I mean, Lucas Chancel can say many of these things that I said much better, but thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll take these 2 last questions and then we'll move to the closing remarks. Yes, go ahead.
Perfect. Hello, is this on? Okay. My name is Adrian and I study international development here at PSIA. And my question also goes back to Professor Thiemann. And it was really interesting how you elaborated on the just transition component of the EU Green Deal. And I was wondering, you were criticizing a lot the emission trading system and that there's not enough components to actually make it a just transition. I was just wondering, to what extent did you consider like the social fund that's being supposed to be generated with the proceedings from it and then being like flowing back to the poor people? And I've heard a lot of criticism from your side, but I was just wondering what would be your suggestions to address this problem? Like you were talking about an equal carbon price, like would you want to have a discriminated price that's already affected in the prices that we see, or I mean it's already quite a complicated system, so I was just wondering whether you could further elaborate how to properly address this just feature of the EU Green Deal. Thank you.
We'll take the second question and then have a round of answers. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Well, I guess my question is maybe a bit similar, but yeah, you've talked a lot about the lack of a social aspect of the Green Deal, but how can the EU create like some sort of ambitious social policy system when they have so little budget and I would say so little experience in this domain? So I was just wondering if you've had like examples in mind or also in past examples of when the EU has attempted to do this. because I feel like overall the EU often speaks mostly to the market and to economic actors. I was wondering if you had counterexamples to that. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just start, and then I hope my co-panelists can join in. First with the social fund that was mentioned, 65 billion euros, if I remember correctly. I think it's a very important question. Let me start first by the observation that these plans of returning the money to the people that are most affected is one that is also in national politics, and however, for example, the German coalition currently faces a very hard time to implement these return tools, and I'm afraid that in times of austerity they might easily fall prey to this. But I want to answer a bigger question. So with respect to the notion of justice, we should ask who benefits from the way we are currently running our economy. Yeah? And in an era of increasing wealth inequality, in an era of, Marcin had this in his prepared remarks and didn't really bring it out, but in an era of dividends that are hitting record highs all over Europe, yeah? And these are dividends that are going to a certain percentage of the population. So I think we can make the statement that the current economy is benefiting a particular part of society more than others. And it's in this idea of justice that I would say, well, it's then this part of society that is supposed to pay more for the negative externality from which the current setup is suffering. And it's this part of society that is supposed to recompensate the other part of society that is currently not benefiting so much. And I can't chiffrer, as I like to say in French. I can't give you a number right now for how big that number would be. It would be a very technocratic answer, right? And I don't want to give you, I can't and I don't want to give you a technocratic answer to it. I would just want to say that I suspect that 65 billion euros is not going to be enough, but more importantly even, it has never gone through public discussion in which a debate could say, you know, there is a green tax. The green tax is paid by the richest that benefit the most from this system to compensate the poor, and we know this green tax, and this green tax is there for us, and we can link to it. The social fund, how many people know about the social fund of the European Union? And it's just a polemical question. The second question is brilliant, and I agree with you, and I know what you're saying. You're basically saying you're asking the EU to do something that the EU can't do, because the EU is not a state, and the EU has so little money, and the EU only addresses the market. I agree with that, but still I will insist on the necessity of my critique, because either the EU needs to change or the EU and the nation states need to change in the way that they interact, because what we're currently getting is not delivering. You see what I mean? I can't just accept this. If I accept just the status quo as it is, my critique is deeply unfair, yes, but I can't accept the status quo, and it needs to change. And in order to change, I need to bring up the things that are not working, because otherwise it won't change, I think. Thanks.
Yes, would anyone else want to chip in?
Should I? I mean, maybe just to compliment Matthias, I mean, pretty much, I think, apart from the question of, I mean, cost turnover and externalities, pricing that in, I think the big point, probably on a more abstract level, is the question of ownership. Like Barbara said, people are taking pride in their work. Nobody wants social benefits. People want to be recognized, people want to be seen, people want to have a decent life. And I think that is pretty much the story and the storylines and the narratives that we have to develop, which are partly in place. So yes, fully agree. I mean, the EU does not have the competencies to actually roll out social policies. Will never work, probably, with 27 member states having their very own little backyards and front gardens. But there are many good practices and good policies around. I mean, been running a class with some students suffering from it, copy-pasting. Well, it's based on the European LIFE program, and that is pretty much projects designed to intelligently copy-paste good practice solutions from one EU member state to the next, and making see that that works. And there are loads of solutions on creating the ownership, empowering people. How was it called? PIMBY, please, in my backyard. Have to remember that. So that is a story of really engaging people and not just sort of pasting policies over them, because that will be a clear kill factor for any and every policy, certainly this transformation policies. So there is a clear word to actually bottom up engage people, create ownership, and that will compensate for a lot of, the social aspects that we are looking into.
Yes, we are facing a temptation right now, and the temptation is to press the pause button. And to press the pause button is very dangerous, because when we are talking about just transition, fair transition, of course I agree, but we have to remember that if we don't do anything, if we push the press button, there will be no fairness and no justice. Clearly, if we don't do anything right now, if we stop working on this transition, it would be a catastrophe for the poorest, especially for the poorest, not for the richest. It would go well for them. So we are facing clearly a sort of paradox, because we have to act, and to act as soon as possible, as quick as possible, and in the same time we have to involve people in this mechanism. And for me, that is the most important theme of the next campaign, because if we ask the right question, not do we need to have a Green Deal? Yes, we need a Green Deal, but how can we work together on this Green Deal, and how we can involve the people the most far from the decision? I read a book, the title was To Get Rid of Democracy Participative. To get rid of democracy participative. Very interesting, because democracy participative, it is not the way to involve the most poorest and the most far from the decision. It's the way to involve always the same people. So maybe we have together to talk to these people in the country, in some areas, in the cities, the people far from us, and to tell them, yes, we are interested to hear what are your needs, what are your opinion on what is happening, and how you can be a part of the solution. This is a very interesting movement, and I think the campaign will be very much more interesting if the candidates do that instead of big meetings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now leave the floor to... Oh, sorry, you wanted to... Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
Just to complement two sentences. I am not the biggest fan of ETS. That was mentioned. ETS question was there, and I want to draw your attention to ETS2, especially where buildings and transport are together. And there is a very different price to change a car and to change a heating system in a house. And the price of allowances will be same, which is absurd. Simply, I don't understand why the Commission combined those two elements, those two systems in one. And from social point of view, the same price will be of poor old person in Bulgaria to pay the same allowances, and the rich owner of combustion in internal combustion car, SUV. And they will pay the same. And the question of social justice is eminent here. And I simply don't understand this obsession of EPP and the Commission in the same time of putting ETS in every possible sector. It is easy because you have a line and the number of allowances every year is predictable because it's going down. And from the perspective of expert is working, but at the end of the day, it is extremely, from social point of view, a heavy system. This is one sentence. Second, in number of industries, this transition will be painful. I mean, numbers of parts of electric car vis-a-vis internal combustion engine car is less, is 1/3 less parts. So it is simpler, so it is cost less. And we do not have enough competence to be in this competition with vis-a-vis Chinese and US cars. ID.7 is 1/3 more expensive than Tesla Y. And I don't simply understand why it is happening. I mean, both are produced in Europe. So what I'm trying to say is we have a determination in political camp to push for the green transition, but I'm not sure that such a determination is in industrial part of our society. They are focused on profits, but they are lazy with the transition, waiting for the public support to pay for them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your contributions. And Christina, did you want to? Okay.
Well, just minimally. To complement what Barbara mentioned, and actually Matthias before as well, I think something that we haven't talked that much, or it has been implicit, is the local jurisdiction. And many of these issues with social policies connected to environmental climate concerns are at the core of local jurisdictions. If we change, modify slightly the governance of these issues, engaging with those local communities, local governments, I think it will be way easier as well to complement or to reach our goals at the national level that are not taking into consideration whatever activity we are doing at the local level at the moment.
Thank you very much to our panelists, and I'll leave the floor to Sébastien Trier for some closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Claire, and I know that we are late on time, so I will be short, but I just first, on behalf of Sciences Po and INRI, I wanted to thank all the speakers for being with us tonight, and all the partner components of Sciences Po, the Sustainable Development Chair, SIA, EAP, and the Center for European Studies. Thank you very much for that. Thanks for the audience to be with us. I think we've begun a very important conversation, given the backlash on the Green Deal that we've been discussing mostly in the second part. But there is a backlash by some economic players and by political parties. What I heard is that we have a lot of entry points for the Green Deal, or at least for the objectives of the ecological transition, to be part of the conversation, or even to be central in the conversation about the next legislation of the European Commission and the Parliament. The EU Green Deal being a kind of both a guiding star for the long-term transformation and a strong basis on which to build. If we think of the fact that there is going to be a discussion about a common investment plan for the industry, I think I'm quoting the Letta report, but I'm not completely sure. But this is going to be central to the conversation. But this has been a conversation with students, with experts, with committed citizens who care for the Green Deal. And I think you did a great job in saying, well, how do we speak to other people? How do we build the conversation outside of this room? I was at the beginning of the afternoon in another context discussing the next Commission's mandate with other people from Sciences Po, Xavier Rago from the OFCE and Natasha Valla from the Dean from the School of Management. And it was really interesting because these were macroeconomic experts. And the way that they were looking on making a retrospective evaluation was not the last mandate and the Green Deal, it was 15 years. And I thought that was really interesting because if you look at those economic experts that are going to be key in the debate, Still quite technocratic, I agree, but very important. What they are looking at is the 15 years of crisis and a wave of changes in the way the European Union is dealing with investment and budgetary rules that has been evolving quite rapidly since 2015. And one of the things that they are saying is that it's good because things have changed without changing the treaty, but we are lacking a long-term vision for that. And actually the Green Deal could be part, or is considered part of the vision. Of course, it's green and digital and fair, but okay, green is part of it. And I think you emphasized a lot, I think in the panel, two main points. We have a new industrial deal that is proposed by the Antwerp Declaration. To my standards, it's not green enough or not sufficiently committing to green and to social, actually, both of them. But we can build a lot of conversation around these new industrial policies because there are lots of disagreements between member states, between economic players on what should be a new industrial policy. And not only about how we fund it, but also about what instruments. Is it about innovation or state aid to industries? Is it about competitiveness, but what type of competitiveness? Is it about security and strategic autonomy, but why not include circular economy and the health of ecosystems more deeply into it? And it's mostly also, I think, something that you mentioned, all of you, a lot about cohesion between member states, but also cohesion within our societies. And that's, I think it was Mark saying, we need to make it not just a new industrial deal, but also, no, an industrial deal, but an industrial and social deal. And that, I think, was a key element of your conversation. I'm going to finish with that, the dimension of the social dimension. If we want to talk to the broader population, Barbara, you told us we need to build a narrative where people are understanding what will be their role and the role of their children in the future and what they could be proud of. And that's something that we still have not completely built in. I mean, it's when we think of mining, when we think of, as Martin was saying, of the industry, of the automotive industry, not so clear what we are actually selling with that continental scale transformation of our economy. But I think this is about building the narrative, but also building the policy that we need for that. And as the student was, I should know the student's name because she was my student, I'm really sorry. As you mentioned, we don't have the social policy and the social mandate for Europe to build on that. But if we build up the debate, as we did tonight, outside and talk to our nephews and grandparents, as Executive Vice President Šefčovič was suggesting, then we can build up also the conversation around the need that, as Matthias was saying, we should not just accept that the social dimension of European policies is so underdeveloped, and that we maybe need to work on that and make it central to the political debate. Asking the right question, somebody said that's exactly what we try to do today, not to say what you need to vote, as Arantxa González was saying, but that we actually ask the right question when we want to vote and when we are talking to the politicians who are making offers for the campaign. But also, I think one of the things that we can do as experts is to try and have an impact on the negotiation after the elections. Because that bargaining is going to happen and it's going to be very technocratic, bargaining between member states and Spitzenkandidaten and parties. And that bargaining moment is when a lot of your concepts and suggestions can really be part of the conversation that will lead to having a new president and a new direction for the European Commission. So thanks a lot. That was extremely useful. I hope that we can have, I don't know exactly how we will build on that. We have not prepared to do a kind of a minutes of that. But I think it's been nourishing a lot of our conversations at Sciences Po, and you'll hear from us at some point. Thank you very much. I think I can close now, and thanks for your patience in the audience.